And welcome back, everyone, to a special birthday Who Would Win. As always, like I say, as long as you give me the suggestion before your birthday, I can get it done within the week. During the week, I've now made the strict rule. If you give me the suggestion on your birthday, I'm just going to have to ignore it until your next birthday comes around. Sorry, I already have a built-in schedule, and I don't want to overwhelm myself unless I'm prepared to do more videos by my own volition, by my own standard. Anyway, though, but Draymond Killer 1815 asked the question: who would win in a fight, the Water Horse or Crusoe from Water Horse: Legend of the Deep, or the Loch Ness Monster from Loch Ness Terror / Beyond Loch Ness? I will say, looking up Loch Ness Terror was a little difficult until I did find that those are just the same movie with a different title. So there's that. So basically, it's the Battle of the Loch Ness Monsters. Who wins in the fight? And that is a very good question. This is one of those fights similar to like a Piranhaconda versus Sharktopus or whatever, where it really is just creatures' physicality, personality coming into play. Right out the gate, though, one of the big things we need to put into consideration is how big are these animals? And I couldn't find any specific recording of size for either of these two, but based on what I could see from the clips of the movies they're both pretty big. Both are normally seem to be dwarfing like a rowboat in size, and dwarfing just a human in size as well. I will say, based on the size diameters, like the heft of their body, length of their necks, all that, I think Crusoe, who is from the Legend of the Water Horse, he was named after Robinson Crusoe. I think Crusoe might be just a smidge larger, but it'd be so minor that it wouldn't really factor into the fight that much. So then you factor into personality, and this is where Crusoe actually might fall into a bit of a on the weaker side, even though he might have the size advantage. Is that while Crusoe definitely shows aggression when he's threatened, he's not an aggressive creature by nature. He did eat the dog, but that's because he got bombed and he attacked Angus. But that's because he was attacked prior and he was on the defensive. He wasn't sure he could trust him anymore. Whereas the Loch Ness Monster from Loch Ness Terror, Beyond Loch Ness, it's easier to do that for some reason from my vocabulary. Beyond Loch Ness is very much a predator and very, very aggressive and constantly killing people throughout the film. So on who's going to be the more aggressive in the fight, it's going to be the Beyond Loch Ness Monster. But then what do they bring to the table? Do they bring anything specific? Well, not really. They're pretty much just physically attacking with either their mouths or their necks or their tails or whatever. But they do have a difference in their morphology. Crusoe is designed pretty close to a plesiosaur with other animal traits put in there. As such, he has flippers, and in the water, it's pretty obvious. In the water, Crusoe actually has the edge over this version of Nessie. We'll explain that in just a second. On land, though, it's a little bit more difficult. It's not that Crusoe actually can't move on land. Crusoe can, in fact, move on land. We've seen that he can. But because he doesn't actually have legitimate feet or arms or anything like that, his body weight, he's more just like flopping around a little bit. Or, just doing that, like doing the sea turtle movement. He's not very graceful on land, to say the least. And fighting on land would prove pretty difficult. But in the water, he can move faster than most boats can. He can do a free willy. He can dive. He's very agile in the water. However, the Beyond Loch Ness Monster, Loch Ness Terror, is one of the versions of Nessie that has feet. It's obviously it's amphibious, but it has legitimate feet. It can walk and move on land and go much farther in the land than, say, Crusoe can. Now, this, I think, though, does pose two problems. One, even though it can move on land a bit more gracefully or it can move farther on land than, say, Crusoe can, it's still not very graceful. This is not necessarily this thing's preferred mode of travel. Honestly, this is one of those made for sci-fi movies. By the way, it's not a bad design. I mean, that image alone isn't bad. But it was a sci-fi original movie. Like the biology of this thing doesn't actually make sense, especially when you actually see its feet. They're really not that webbed. So it's clear that it's probably still better adapted for water, but because it has feet instead of flippers, in the water, Crusoe would probably have the edge there. And then you get to their actual whatever weaponries they have. Because he has feet, not flippers, he does have claws that he could theoretically use to attack. His tail is longer, so he can whip. He can grab things and lift them with his mouth. His mouth has massive fangs in it. While Crusoe seems to be Crusoe's mouth is a lot less dangerous, although you can still definitely take your arm off. It doesn't look like it's used for like tackling very large prey, most likely. So that being said, Crusoe most likely is capable of lifting large things with his mouth as well. So they're kind of even in that. So who would win in the fight here? Well, obviously there's two ways to look at this fight: in the land and in the water. If we look at it in the land, Crusoe's definitely going to have that edge. I think, like I said, he looks to be a little bit larger than, not by much, but by a little bit larger, so he does have at least somewhat of a size advantage. Which you would, like I said, shouldn't play that big of a factor, at least it doesn't on land. But in the water, if you're bigger than your opponent and more agile than your opponent, which he definitely is, then he can move around and actually bum rush and clash into his opponent with a lot more mass than his opponent has, and at higher speeds. Add on to the fact that both these creatures are wow, I don't even know what that sentence I was trying to say was. So add that on. Add the fact that while they do seem to be a little bit more intelligent than the average creature, Crusoe actually is very intelligent, whereas this seems to be a slightly above average intelligent predator. That's about it. It's mostly just relying on natural instincts, all that, when it comes to the one to the left here. But Crusoe actually can strategize if he needs to. He's not like Einstein or anything like that, but legitimately he could kind of think his way out of a situation if he had to. Whereas this thing, not so much. So in the water, I think it would basically be a lot of bum rushing, clashing, biting when he had to, and then getting out of the way when he needed to. Crusoe would probably win the fight in the water. On land, that's a lot more of a different answer here, I think. Because on land, Crusoe is a lot less, I'm here. I can move around a bit, but I can't go after this guy in land. Whereas this thing, the Beyond Loch Ness Monster, is definitely something that can move around on land a lot easier, and it's a lot more vicious than Crusoe is. So if it starts getting the bites in, it's going to depend on how durable that skin is on Crusoe, but it's going to be a lot harder of a fight for Crusoe on the land than it is for the other Loch Ness monsters. So Loch Ness Monster starts biting into Crusoe. Crusoe might start to bite back. And because he is probably a little bit more powerful than this Loch Ness Monster Crusoe, he might be able to pull him off him. But unfortunately, in terms of their hardware, this one's got the more lethal weaponry in his hands, or in his mouth. So he's going to be dishing out a lot more damage. I'll say that I think Crusoe might be able to win. If Crusoe can get back into the water, he could pull the win out. But that would require him to getting back into the water. If he can. If the fight stays on land, it's probably not going to look very good for Crusoe. Not to say Crusoe would be completely outmatched, or he'd be guaranteed to lose. But if I'm going to be honest, I think it leans more towards the Beyond Loch Ness Terror Loch Ness Monster, if we're talking about the on-land fight. So in the water, I'm definitely going to give the win to Crusoe. On the land, I'm going to give the win to the Beyond Loch Ness Monster, but there is avenues I think that Crusoe can win. So if we're to theoretically use like math, like, well, it's a 50-50 split. Well, no, because I think there's the percentage of how many times Crusoe loses under the water versus the percentage of times he wins on land, I think just barely edges it in Crusoe's favor. But this is just my opinion. What do you think? Do you think it would be Crusoe, or do you think it would be the Loch Ness Terror Beyond Loch Ness Monster? Let me know in the comments below. But until then, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.